physical terms, oil is a rather messy substance, dark in color, greasy in texture, and the crude version of it can literally be crude. And a government-to-government deal has raised a storm, with the opposition labeling it a scam, while the government defends it as a sweetheart deal. With Uganda wading in, we join analysts in soiling hands in the dive to the bottom of the barrel in search of facts and, well, some oil. Now, other than oil, a leaking roof can also be quite messy. And it was a rather wet week at the arrivals terminal of the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, as a leaking roof treated visitors to a cold arrivals shower in the region's biggest hub. So, who let the waters in? Wasn't me. And other answers coming up. And going up too is the cost of citizen services. Up and down, maybe more accurate, and underline, just maybe. Which is why the take, the sense, and the kicker may have to be a joint word about government communication. Just maybe. The news gang is here.
The cost of fuel shot up significantly after the deal. Why have things moved from bad to worse since the deal was signed? Well, the deal was a scam for which we now demand full disclosure and full accountability. It is corrupt and rotten to the core. It is state capture by Mr. Ruto and company and a conspiracy against the country. Ruto's collapsing the country while feeding Kenyans on lullabies.
Gentlemen, welcome to the show and welcome to our viewers as well. The hashtag to use is NewsGang at Citizen TV Kenya. We're looking forward to your views. And what a week it has been. We have talked about the oil sector in just about every form and fashion, from the government-to-government deal to somebody claiming the oil was theirs, to Uganda saying, you know, we're going to find our own way, our own route, our own storage. What a week it has been with respect to just one but very crucial commodity in the country. You know, so let's begin with these complaints, and we've heard from the opposition today. Those complaints have come from both Raila Odinga, they have come from Yoweri Museveni, who's the president of Uganda, about how that oil gets to them, the cost of it. But let's begin with the questions around this deal. And there seem to be quite a number, Sam.
Right. And this is a never-ending question which we've really tried to find answers for on the various shows that we have here. And every time there are still questions that are pending without any answers. And whatever Raila Odinga is asking, it is not new because of the mystery that this has been. There has been attempts of various people to look for information. There has been invitations of officials within the Energy Ministry to go to Parliament and answer to some of these questions. But there's still information that is not clear. We see a statement by the Cabinet Secretary, Davis Chirchir, sort of explaining the chronology of events, and it begins in March of this year. And he goes out clearly to state that they had been looking for a way out because the country was in trouble. It was becoming a crisis because every other month you need about $500 million US to procure oil, which is becoming an expensive import. And then says that at that time you'll find that because they were using the open tendering system, so that every oil marketing company that would want to bid for that, they would do that. And every time they need to pay, so they go through different commercial banks looking for the dollar. So the Cabinet Secretary is saying that because of that, it was creating an unnecessary demand for the dollar and making it very expensive, even causing that shortage to an extent that it was affecting the Kenya shilling. But then again, what is peculiar, I find in that statement, he says that On the 1st of March, they invited bids for a tender to supply the country with oil at credit terms of 180 days, which is 6 months. In 6 days' time, it was closed. So it was closed on 6th, and they determined that it was non-responsive. Non-responsive means that the companies that were bidding did not meet all the requirements. So what did the government do? Then went ahead to have direct engagements and negotiations with the governments of UAE as well as Saudi Arabia in search for that commodity. What is interesting is that a deal was reached, and on the 10th of that month, 10th of March, there's some signing that happened. They call it Master Framework Agreement. So how do you close the bidding on 6th, open them, determine that they're non-responsive, going to government negotiations?
In 4 days.
And on the 4th day, you sign a Master Framework Agreement with those respective companies. And within a very short time, those companies are now able to identify their partners in Kenya who are supposed to now do the logistics and what have you. So yes, he's explaining, but he's also saying that the documentation of those transactions is a public document that is in the public domain, that it is filed in court. Well, he makes an attempt of explaining what that is, but still, what was the agreement on the premium that is supposed to be paid for once the importing company is bringing the oil here? What is the premium? Because yes, it will come at a price, but there are certain charges that exist there. So what was that? To an extent that now it is affecting the landed cost, because if you look at it, the landed cost now is way much higher than it was even before the government-to-government deal. And there are several explanations that have been given, that the forex is changing, the Kenya shilling is depreciating, fine. But then again, it will be important to now get to clarifying and giving details as to what constitutes the landed cost. What is the cost of bringing that oil here? What is the forex charge? What is, they call it the demurrage? It is important
Storage,
to know those factors, and we'll be looking at the formula later on.
Yeah, and you know, this is, I think the big thing about this government-to-government deal, as happens with many deals in this country, and not just over the last year, but you know, in previous times, is the process. And that often seems you know, sometimes unclear, sometimes difficult to explain, with the outcome, which is that you're supposed to do things like ease the pressure on the Kenya shilling versus the dollar, to perhaps ensure stable prices, more affordable prices. But it all comes down to the process, you know, Linus, and that is what we are now getting explanations for. And this is not the first time we're getting explanations for it, and this is not the first time, obviously, that questions are coming up. Process about how we acquire things in this country, how we procure goods and services. Again, you know, a matter that's coming up in the spotlight now.
I think let's cut to the chase. And I know as a country we go through this almost like a ritual, and avoiding what the facts are. And the facts are there are serious conflicts of interest around governance. It's an African tragedy, and particularly a Kenyan tragedy. Because even something like this, the passion we are seeing, is it in public interest or in private interest? I remember, and I think Sam was hosting one of the shows here, when the Kenya National Trading Corporation came up with that statement about companies that are listed to import grain, sugar, rice, and things like that to alleviate the hunger situation.
Yeah.
Again, what was the biggest and most comparable attribute about that process is exactly the same as this oil government-to-government oil deal. And I think Kenyans are going to, not just Kenyans are raising questions, but also when it comes to even a neighbor that has relied on the way things used to work here for years.
Yeah.
We've never had Uganda complaining about oil and complaining about how Kenya is carrying out its importation regime. And here is a friendly government and a president who has close ties with the president of the republic here in Kenya, complaining about middlemen. He said an entire country is buying oil from brokers.
Yeah.
He actually called them brokers or middlemen.
Yes.
And when you hear Yoweri Museveni talk about it, he speaks of it with some sense of disgust, that this is wrong. And how did we get there? And I think these are some of the questions that will have to be answered in the fullness of time. When government was giving justification for this in March, remember the argument was we will ease the pressure on the shilling, on the dollar rather. And the exchange rate at the time, I think, was about 130 something.
123 or 125,
in
thereabouts, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where are we now? We're at 152, heading to 160. Meaning that the very object of that arrangement has not been achieved. And it's time we started having a conversation about this. But the problem is, you know, politics sets in, and whether it's the opposition or government, they are likely to see this from the prism of politics. But I think there should be a sober minority, can I call them, that can just look at the numbers and say, is this working or not? And what is that we have gotten wrong? Because there are two things that are going on right now. One is the objectives of easing the pressure on the dollar has not been achieved. That's one. Number two, we are opening a new front in terms of how we are perceived and how we are related to in the region. Our biggest trading partner, Uganda, is complaining.
Yeah.
So this is something that the country needs to pay attention to and say, what is that maybe, just maybe, we are not getting right. Then, of course, there is the silence of the private sector that has been in the know for all these years. Open tendering system is the way that free enterprise works, and that's how even prices were controlled. We've gone into this arrangement that it seems only the government knows how it works, and now there are questions coming up not just locally, but also regionally.
Yeah. You know, what you were saying about President Yoweri Museveni, he had this long thread, you know, on Twitter. He said, without my knowledge, our wonderful people were buying this huge quantity of petroleum products from middlemen in Kenya. Then he says, a whole country buying from middlemen in Kenya or anywhere else? Amazing, but true. And he goes on to say that these middlemen have inflated prices by close to 60%. You know, of the cost, and, you know, leading to exaggerated prices. And then we know what happened, you know, with the authorities there, that then now started to say we're going to look at having our storage primarily in Uganda and in Tanzania. The talk of that pipeline between Uganda and Tanzania is now kicking up steam again. I want us to listen to Raila Odinga today, who then talked about what this change of route could mean for the country.
The change of route by landlocked trading partners will force a number of Kenyan oil marketing companies and logistic firms to close shop. Of course, this leads to job losses, loss of foreign exchange, loss of revenue for the country as a result of KPC losing transit share. Ideally, Kenya should have provided a pipeline and storage capacity allocation for Uganda market. Kenya should also have allowed the direct participation of the Uganda oil marketers in sourcing petroleum products through the Northern Corridor route.
And whilst they're complaining of the cost that they now say is exaggerated on their end due to middlemen, we are also here, Sam, grappling with the cost of the fuel. We've seen international prices going down. you know, we don't really seem to benefit. It only seems to increase when, you know, the prices on the international scene go up.
Right.
But we don't seem to benefit from a reduction in prices. And I think we've had some of the lowest crude prices since when? Earlier this year, around May, around June. So you did this story yesterday, just taking us through this calculation and which oil we are buying, when did we buy it, at what cost, how much are we selling it now, months later. It would seem it would be a calculation that we should be able to understand, right? I mean, you know, I know it's complex stuff, but even that should be easy, and there should be a thread that you can see and clearly understand, like 1 + 1 equals
2.
Yeah, it should.
It's supposed to be complex, is it? Yeah.
Well, it is interesting because, and actually, this is the first time that you're having the Energy Petroleum Regulatory Authority indicating that, let me just get the quote so that I don't misquote at the good office, and says that in this review, the cargoes that have been factored were priced based on the average September 2023 Platts price, which was much higher than October 2023. So it means that the product we'll be buying up to 14th of December is product based on the price of September.
Okay.
So those are like 3 months before.
Right.
Meaning in September, probably the prices were determined based on products that were bought based on prices of June or May, which is quite interesting. And I think the reason why April was explaining this is because Kenyans have been asking questions. At the global stage, the Central Bank of Kenya has consistently, I think for the 6th week now, been saying that the prices of Marban oil have been dropping. Every week it has been
in their
dropping.
weekly bulletin, right? Yes.
Exactly,
yes.
In the weekly bulletins of the Central Bank of Kenya. The international prices that are determined by the international benchmark called Platts have been showing that October actually the oil prices dropped drastically to about $804. And just to indicate that that $804 is actually the lowest, if you're to count, since June, but it is not yet reflected. The Cabinet Secretary says that because our prices are based on what the prices were in September, that's why they are expensive. And indeed, he correctly says that September was the most expensive on the international stage. So he's correct on the attribution. What is in question is how come that it takes so long for these products to get into the country, especially if you're saying that what was bought in September is what we'll be consuming on 14th of December. At least you would say a month late. So for instance, we would be, we're now in the month of November. So up to 14th, then you can say the products of September.
Yeah.
But up to now, after 14th, which is 15, it should be the products of October, so that Kenyans also benefit. So it is good explanation, but also it's coming in such a technical language. I understand that the trade in oil is technical, but they may want to do better in as far as communicating that is concerned. And therefore, when you look at the prices, to an extent that were it not for the price stabilization component that has been introduced by the government based on petroleum development levy, then a litre of petrol will be costing you 229 shillings in Nairobi. So because of that component, then it's coming down to 217 shillings. But there's a lot that remains to be told, because how much is the petroleum development levy so that it's able to reduce that pricing? How much is government securing from the budget? Because, yes, they don't like to call it subsidized, I mean,
so stabilization,
subsidy.
Please.
But I think in the current supplementary budget, there's some money that the Energy Ministry was looking for under Article 223 to go into that, meaning probably the petroleum development levy may not be sufficient to meet this reduction for all these products. So the many questions that really need to be answered.
And these are important questions because the cost of fuel affects the cost of everything in the economy: transportation, food, energy, our electricity, you know, and all of these explanations that we are seeking. Then, you know, we look at the cost of the product, but then something else rather spectacular happens, you know, in the oil sector. Someone comes and says, no, hang on. The oil is mine. We'll listen to that in a bit. But Linus, then it doesn't get any better. It doesn't get any easier, right? So we have all of these issues around a government-to-government deal. Was it really a government-to-government deal? Has it achieved its intended purpose? But then, you know, something that seems really simple, somebody says, oh, there's some oil there and it's mine, and the government says, no, it's not. And she says, yes, it is, and no, it's not. And then she gets questioned, and someone disappears and reappears and, you know, has some interesting tales to tell. Linus, what does this say about us? I don't know if we're able to listen to some of hers, but we will get to that in a minute. But, you know, Linus, just put this whole saga into context for us. It seems rather incredulous, doesn't it?
It's murky. It's a muddle. We will spend a lot of time trying to figure out what exactly is going on. Because here comes Anne Njeri Njoroge, who says she applied and she is importing oil worth 17 billion Kenyan shillings. Billion. Billion. That's a big difference from million, Sam, right?
Yeah.
So 1 billion is 1,000 million.
Yes.
So that's 17,000 millions.
And what did Kenyans do? They immediately were saying, can you see 17 billion here? But I think, in all fairness, let's listen to Anne Njoroge explaining how she got here, how she actually got to import oil worth 17 billion shillings.
Na wakati tunasubiri, nilienda kumuona CS Chirichir, na ndio akaniambia mafuta sio yangu tena, mafuta ni ya kampuni inajiita Garana. Kaambia sijauza mafuta yangu wala sijasaini mkataba na hiyo kampuni inajiita Garana, kwa hivyo mafuta ni yangu. Ndio akasema haiwezekani na nifanye kwenda kwa CID headquarters to record a statement.
Yeah, that's Anne Njeri Njoroge who claims that she did import that oil. And in fact, before that, she explained that she had reached out to all the processes in terms of applying to the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Body. Here she is.
Apply kwa IPRA, na after that ililipwa kama kawaida, kama sheria, na nimekuwa nikisubiri kila wakati kupewa import permit ambayo sikuwa ninajua inahitajika.
Yeah, that's Anne Njoroge, and she spoke at length at that press conference outside the court in Mombasa. And our teams here at Citizen TV actually reached out to the family. And the story was consistent from that end, that our mother is in this business and she has the documents. There were documents that were displayed, which the Kenya Ports Authority said were not authentic. The MD and the chairman have also held a press conference and said the papers were forgery. Then the next thing was supposed to be, if there's a forgery, you shall be arrested and you face prosecution. But that's not what happens. Anne goes to DCI headquarters to write a statement, and then she goes missing for another 5 days. And she narrated her story that she was abducted. Now, this is really fuzzy. We don't get to know what is really going on. But in the fullness of time, that will be established. What I know at this stage is she's been subjected to a lot of jokes online and offline, including Raila Odinga saying today, can you see 17 billion in that lady? There are those who are making reference to the National Youth Service scam some time back, that included, among others, a hairdresser. So this is yet another episode of the big Kenyan show. So at this point, I think we can only promise the next episode as details.
Coming soon.
Yes, yes.
And you know, now when you hear and when you recall Museveni's tweets saying, you know, there's middlemen who are involved. So we don't really know, you know, what the case is here. But at the same time, he's saying that then you've got this saga. It, you know, it just sort of lends some sort of credence to what he's saying and makes it look even more, you know, of a saga and a circus, so to speak, you know, with this story. And, you know, Sam, like we're saying, there was that statement that came out yesterday from the ministry, and everybody is denying knowing her. The Energy Petroleum Regulatory Authority doesn't know who she is. The Kenya Ports Authority doesn't know who she is. The Ministry of Energy, you know, does not recognize her. So everybody's saying, we don't know her. She's never done this sort of thing before. And it's just interesting that, you know, an ordinary Kenyan would come up and say that oil is mine. You know, we're saying this a little earlier, you know, if this is something you've never done. I mean, some of these tales, you know, are beyond belief. And I understand now Parliament has summoned her, you know, to get into some more understanding. If she does honor the summons, then it'll be, you know, more of these tales that are unfolding, you know, on one end of things. And like we say, we will wait to see if there will be prosecution, because if you are accusing somebody of forgeries, then, you know, you wait to see what the charges will look like. But Sam, this just doesn't get, you know, any better, any easier, doesn't give any more understanding to what is now, you know, a very messy industry this week.
Right, and the confusing part is, again, coming from the statement from the Cabinet Secretary, Davis Chiriche, because he says that the organization or the company of Anjeri, that is ANS Import and Export Enterprises Limited, they made an application for license for importation, export and wholesale of petroleum products. But then after making an assessment, they said that she didn't qualify because she didn't have proof of annual sales volume in Kenya, that is of 6.6 million liters of super petrol. That also she didn't have proof of operation of 5 licensed retail stations in Kenya, and she didn't have proof of operation of a licensed depot in Kenya, but also proof of annual turnover of $10 million. So $10 million would be about, how much is it? 10 times 50, 150.
150.
157?
157 is the exchange rate times 10.
Yes, yes.
So that is what?
Yeah, we're almost at 160 now. You notice I'm moving away from the math. It's, yes.
It is 1.57 billion shillings. So she didn't prove that. But she was able to procure 17 billion worth of consignment. But I think the bigger story here for me is if actually the ministry took the time to assess whether she qualifies to import, does it then mean that there's a likelihood there's oil coming to the country outside the G2G deal? Because if you're taking the pains, wouldn't it just be rejected outright and say, I mean, you know. Knowing that since, is it April, after that deal was signed in March, that any oil that comes into the Kenyan market is under the government-to-government deal, and the companies that import it are known, and the dealers in the country are known to be Gov't, Galana, and who? Yes.
Gulf, Aramco, and Galana.
Oryx, yes.
Yeah.
Oryx, yes.
So they are the ones that are doing the logistics for that. So there's a question there that needs to be answered. And if this oil, 17 billion worth of oil, was not hers, and it is not, and does not belong to Galana, as the statement from the Energy Ministry says, then whose was it? Who is this who was importing it? If indeed it is confirmed that indeed she is not worth that much, and it's not her business, who is she doing it for? If they are proxies, who are they?
Important questions. We shall see about that.